Good afternoon. It is the 15th of September. It's a Tuesday. My name is Aaron Hunt, a partner here at Stace Hammond, and I head up the Migration Partners Division. Now, as always, this is not legal advice. It is just us commenting on what's happening with immigration in New Zealand. If you want legal advice, get in contact with us, and we can then hopefully provide that to you. Now, there's a lot of changes in the last few days, in the last week since our last video. A lot of changes happening with immigration here in New Zealand, a lot of announcements and some changes to the operational manual. Now, I'm back in the office, finally have a chance to go through the emails and communications and changes that we've been made aware of. Just so you're aware, I have been off with chest infection, some sort of flu, so my voice is a little bit crackly, so I do apologise for that. I will try and speak loudly enough that you can hear me. This could be the longest video we have made because there is a number of changes to go through. For that reason, I'll be putting into the description below the video some time codes of when we go through various points or various visa types. So if you want to just hear about a certain item, you can just jump to those time codes, look at the description. However, there is some overlap in those areas, so you may want to watch the entire video. That's up to you. Now, the information in this video is partially based on emails we've received from Immigration New Zealand as to the changes that are occurring, as well as changes to the operational manual. Now, of course, the operational manual are the actual rules the immigration officers will be following. The emails themselves, while they provide some detail, don't always provide the level of detail that we want to get. We want to know exactly how things are going to work. The emails will often provide the covering overall view rather than the actual detail. So some of the information still needs that detail, and we won't get that until the official rules are received or we get more information from immigration. However, we will notice what we've got so far and what we've heard and the source of the information. Now, first thing we're going to do is the work visas holders who are offshore. Now, these are who hold visas that tie them to a particular employer. This is important. It does not cover those on open work visas, notably post-study work visa holders or those who have work visas under partnership. We'll cover the partnership ones later. Open work visa holders, currently we have no news for you. But for those who have a work visa tied to a particular employer, now in previous videos we covered the changes that were coming for those work visa holders. First of all, we provided information from press releases that had been released and our view on them, and then a few hours later we got confirmation from immigration that we were correct, that these changes were coming through. Now, we don't have the official exemption rules for these people yet, haven't been provided yet, but we will let you know when we do have them. But we can clarify a few points now that we have more information from Immigration New Zealand, which primarily came from a press release that was put out by the Honourable Chris Fafoy, who's the Minister of Immigration. Now, this will function as an exception at the border. So basically, if you already have the visa, you require a right to come across the border, so you'll be applying for an exception to the border to allow you to come across. It requires several items which we're going to go through. The first thing is that the person holds a work to residence visa, an essential skills work visa that is not subject to a stand down period, or an entrepreneur visa. Now, that stand down period is for those who have had 3 one-year essential skills visas and cannot re-enter the country for the following year. If that is you, that does not apply here. If you have a 3-year essential skills work visa or a 5-year one, or you've had a 1-year work visa that is still relevant and you're not part of that 3-year stand down period, then this will apply to you. If the visa has expired, then you need to have been holding a visa when you left New Zealand and have to have applied for a further visa before 10th of August 2020, which is when they shut off foreign applications. So if you've got an expired visa and have applied for a further visa, then this, at least you should fall under this so far. That the requirement that the person still holds the job or continues to operate the business. So if you've got the work to residence or the essential skills work visa, then you still hold the job that is included in the writing on that visa for that job for that employer. If you're an entrepreneur visa holder, then you still operate the business that the visa ties to. That you departed New Zealand on or after 1 December 2019. So you left New Zealand possibly for the Christmas period and for whatever reason you've been stuck overseas. If you left before 1 December, then this will not apply to you. And that you have lived in New Zealand for at least 2 years, or at least 1 year if one of the following conditions matches your situation. You have an entrepreneur visa, you have dependent children in New Zealand, your parents or adult siblings ordinarily reside in New Zealand, or you submit an application for residence on or before 31 July 2020. Now note there that the dependent children need to be in New Zealand, so you're basically returning to your children, but the requirement for parents or adult siblings doesn't require that, just that they are ordinarily resident in New Zealand, so they usually live here. They may be currently overseas, also maybe with you stuck overseas, but if they need the requirement is that they are ordinarily resident, so they're typically resident in New Zealand if they could be generally. The dependent children, of course, must be here. Now the government expects about 800 odd people to fall into this category, which is probably lower than we had expected. From the Minister's release, this will also include the applicant's immediate family who are travelling with them, but that was just mentioned in passing, so we really want to see something more official from Immigration New Zealand to just confirm that it will include them. We believe it will, but we still only have the press release to work from. Now the next category we're going to look at is for partners to New Zealand work visa holders and partners to New Zealand citizens residents. We have an email from Immigration New Zealand that actually came to us earlier today, one of the many emails we got from them today with changes. Now this does not cover partners of or dependents of citizens and residents who come from visa waiver countries. Now we'll cover those people later in this video. So this covers those who are not from visa waiver countries or those who are in partnerships with people who are not residents or citizens. Now just so you know, visa waiver countries are the 61 or so countries or regions where the person is granted a visa on arrival in the country and don't need to apply for a visa in advance. Now for those who are not from visa waiver countries, Immigration New Zealand has now announced that they have resumed some visa processing for those people who are currently offshore. Now, as we've stated before, Immigration New Zealand cannot grant a visa if the visa cannot be used. Now for this reason, you need to notice the difference here because we're going to cover three different important words here. Difference between processing, deciding and approving. Now processing means they are looking at the application and reviewing it and going through the process where they look at the various documentation, the relationship, medicals, that sort of thing. Deciding is the actually making of a decision, and approving is granting the visa if it's decided successfully. So INZ are now processing and deciding offshore applications for some relationship-based visas if they are supported by a New Zealand citizen or resident. So partners of New Zealand citizens and residents who are offshore can now be granted visas. INZ are now processing but not approving or deciding offshore applications for selected visa categories, which we'll cover below. So they're being processed, but they won't provide an actual visa at the moment. Now, they use the word approving rather than deciding. We think they mean to deciding and approving because they're generally the same thing. They do use both words in the email, make it a little bit confusing. But we would expect that Immigration New Zealand wouldn't decline a visa but then not approve one at the same time. So we think it's going to be, they'll do the processing and then when they get to the point where they make a decision, they'll leave it there and wait. Now before we go through the list of which visas are being processed offshore, apart from the ones we've already covered, it's best to clarify the difference between a partnership visitor visa and a general visitor visa. This is a big issue that comes up with a number of our clients come to us with, and they've had declines for this reason. Now partnership visas, with the exceptions of visas for culturally arranged marriages, require that the partners are living together at the time of the application and at the time of the decision. Now the official wording is that a couple are living together in a genuine and stable relationship. Now there will be some allowance with the current pandemic with people sort of divided against their will. If the applicant was living overseas away from their partner and was applying to come to New Zealand to be with their partner and it wasn't for a culturally arranged marriage, then the applicant would most likely have been looking for a general visitor visa as they were not living together. An application for a partnership visa in that situation we would expect would be declined because the partners were not, the couple were not living together in a partnership. They may in their mind see themselves as being partners, but they were not living together in a partnership. So applications are often declined in that situation as people who are in relationships apply for a partnership visa as in their mind they're in a partnership, and we can understand that mentality, but they are not actually living together. So the documentation of immigration in New Zealand could have been clearer on this in the past, and we've had a number of issues with this with clients. So here, apart from the culturally arranged marriage exception, partnerships means that you meet Immigration New Zealand's requirements of a partnership and not merely being in a relationship. So, for example, if one of you came to New Zealand for a new job or to study for 6 months before getting a work visa, and then looks to bring their wife or their husband across from another country, you are not at that point in what they call a living together in a partnership, so therefore you wouldn't fall under their allowances for a partnership visa. The application would be for a general visitor visa, and you'd be looking for what we call as being a waiver to the requirements, to the bona fides, in that if you're coming to New Zealand to then be reunited with your partner, you'd be going for a general visitor visa, waiver to exceptions, on the basis that you're coming to New Zealand for the hope to stay here long term. That's something that definitely you need to talk to someone about to help you out with that kind of visa. But at least in this situation, if that is you, then you will not sort of fall under what they consider a partnership. You'll be looking for a general visitor visa, which is going to be an issue currently. So we'll go through the list now for the partnership visas. So those who actually have been in that situation where they were living together in a genuine stable relationship, but for whatever reason they are currently separated. So partnership visitor visa under partnership, typically that means that you might have someone who had a work visa, was overseas, was looking to come to New Zealand with their partner, and they were applying for that path. Partnership visitor visa, culturally arranged marriage, we covered that. Partnership work visa, same as visitor visa, living together, looking for a right to work in New Zealand. Partnership resident, so in partnership for living together for at least 12 months with a New Zealand resident or citizen. And partnership resident, partner of an expatriate, similar thing, so partner of a New Zealand citizen, the New Zealand citizen is overseas. There's also processing commencing on the visas for dependents. So dependent child visitor visa, so child New Zealand resident or citizen, dependent child visitor visa for adopted child, dependent child student for a child of New Zealand citizen or resident, dependent child resident for a family child dependent, or dependent child resident for a dependent of an expatriate. Now, of course, all of these visas will have other conditions, so just because you fit into that category doesn't mean you're going to be granted that visa. This is just going through what visas they are now looking at processing when there has been that halt generally up till now for the past sort of 6 months or so. If you do need further advice on whether you will be able to get those visas, contact us for advice and we can give you help with that. Now, all of these visa holders will be exempt from New Zealand border restrictions, so you will not need to actually apply for an expression of interest for an exception to travel. If this visa is granted, you will be given a right to come into the country. Now, Immigration New Zealand will retain their right to grant a general visitor visa to any of the above applications. So, especially for the situation where you apply perhaps for a visa under partnership, and they go, well, actually, you weren't living under partnership, instead we might grant you a general visitor visa. That is a great thing for you to get, at least knows that you can enter the country. However, you cannot use that visa yet. So what they'll do is that they won't grant the general visitor visa. They'll let you know that they can't grant you the partnership one because you don't meet the requirements, but they may offer to put the visa application on hold on the basis that when they are allowed to let visitor visas of that category, they will then grant you that general visitor visa. So it might not be an instant response, but it will at least give you that peace of mind that you will be allowed to enter the country when the border conditions change. A couple more notes are that the visas, these partnership visas, will allow for a 6-month entry window. So you'll have 6 months to actually come into New Zealand once that visa is granted. That's the partnership visa or the dependent child visa. As travel can still be difficult to arrange out of a number of countries. I know people in Dubai, people in India, there is difficulty getting out there. Now, If the applications are more than 3 months old, then there may be a requirement to provide further information to immigration. This will be in particular will be further partnership information to show that you're still in a partnership, you're still talking. So definitely log all your communications, your phone calls, your text messages, and provide that to immigration to help prove that you are still in that partnership. And if you come from a country where there is a high incidence of tuberculosis, you may be required to provide a new chest x-ray just to make sure that you haven't caught it and aren't going to be bringing it in. There are some other visa types that are now processing as well, or they're about to commence being processing. Several of these require entries into a pool and the draws of an expression of interest. So if you know what those are, then you're probably familiar with these visa types. The refugee family support applications, both Tier 1 and 2, they will be, processing of those will recommence. Investor Category 1 and 2 with expressions of interest for Investor 2. So this means that the EOI draws for Investor 2 category visas will be restarting. The Parent Retirement Category. Now this shouldn't be confused with the Parent Category visa, which is the old one that was paused and was restarting in March but was delayed. That one we have heard nothing about from Immigration New Zealand yet, apart from that there is a lot of applications in that pool which will likely be declined because they were made 3 years ago when the old rules were in place. The Parent Retirement Category visa is the visa that requires at least $1.5 million in assets to be held by the parent with a $60,000 a year income the parent is receiving from some source. So that is a relatively rare visa type to get, but that is recommencing. We're hoping to get the parent category visa, the new visa type, or the old visa, but changed to be starting again soon. A number of our clients have been asking about that. And the entrepreneur visa, which likewise is based on a pool draw that is due to commence soon. Now, the visas for these applications for those offshore cannot currently be granted. So this is about being processed rather than granted, but they will allow Immigration New Zealand to at least further process the application to minimise any further delay. Those which require a pool system, we're assuming the pool draws will keep recommencing. That wasn't made completely clear in the correspondence. But we do know that there was no mention of skilled migrant. Of course, the largest of the pool draw systems with the EOI and the ITA, the invitation to apply, that wasn't mentioned. We're waiting to hear back more about that. Now that still has a massive backlog on skilled migrant applications. For example, those who don't get priority on the application, they're currently processing applications made in February 2019. So that's what, 19 months ago. Those who can get priority on their skilled migrant application once it restarts or have application currently, they are currently allocating those applications within 2 weeks of the application being made. So it's going from 19 months for non-priority to 2 weeks for priority. Now for priority you need $51 per hour or be working in a high demand area. That's going to be rare for most people, but that is, if you're looking at doing a skilled migrant and you are falling into that category, then I'd say get ready to do an EOI because once that draw takes place, you might be able to slide in there at a very quick rate and get residency. Give it a call if you want to talk to more about that. So far we've looked at those who have already applied for visas while offshore. Looking now at those who haven't applied for visas yet, the base sort of rule is that you cannot do so until at least 9th of November 2020. That rule is still in place, and that may be extended further once we get closer to that date, depending on the border conditions. There are some exceptions, of course. There are the border exceptions we've covered in videos previously. There's also for those who are diplomatic staff or their families, those heading to Antarctica, because New Zealand's sort of the gateway to Antarctica, those who are eligible for a regional seasonal employer visa, and those who are getting a visa based on relationships with New Zealand citizens or residents. Now we're going to cover that in a little bit more detail now. In particular, those who are coming from visa waiver countries. Now from early October, those partners or dependent children from visa waiver countries who are applying as a partner or of a New Zealand citizen or resident or dependent child of one of those will be able to apply for a critical purpose visitor visa, same as we've mentioned before, or relationship-based temporary entry visa. Now, we've handled a number of these critical purpose visitor visas successfully for clients. It's been a relatively smooth process, a few small hiccups that we would see in a quickly introduced process. I think Immigration New Zealand has done a relatively good job with that process. Now, the process will be that you apply for an exemption. So if it's successful for the exemption through a general website on the internet, then you'll be able to apply. You'll get a little code to enter into the Immigration New Zealand sort of proper application website, and you'll apply for a visitor visa as a critical purpose visitor visa through that site. Now, that visa, when granted, will allow 6 months in New Zealand. So you'll get 6 months to enter New Zealand. Once you get into the country, you'll be able to stay here for 6 months, which will give you, which means you have to apply for a new visa on arrival if you plan to be here for longer than 6 months. It's basically your chance to get in the door. Once you're here, apply for another visa. Now, Australian citizens, of course, are a special category due to our close association with New Zealand and Australia being very much tied together. Now, the Minister Fafoy states that the usual residence visa will be granted on arrival, as it always has been. Of course, you'll arrive in New Zealand after getting the CPVV. You'll get here, you'll arrive on the visitor visa, but when you get to the border, you'll actually be granted your residence visa as you typically would, allowing you to remain here as long as you want. Now, for Australian citizens, of course, and anybody else, if you leave New Zealand, that visa that you entered in on will no longer be valid. So if you're coming to New Zealand, we'd recommend that before you leave the country, if you're planning to come back, talk to a lawyer and sort out your right to re-enter. Last thing you want is to do all this hard work to get into the country, to leave for some reason, and then find you're back at square one. Now, of course, for anybody coming into New Zealand, you're going to have that 14-day managed isolation requirements. The only exception, actually, we had this the other day, the only exception to that 14-day managed isolation requirement is those coming from Antarctica, who have been there for sort of 6 months and who are, there's no pandemic in Antarctica, so they're being allowed to go through. Everybody else who's coming into the country from anywhere but Antarctica must do the 14-day managed isolation. Now, there is a charge for this. It's a set fee, will be paid by the person after they've been through isolation. It's also required for New Zealand citizens or residents if they are not returning, if they return to New Zealand for less than 90 days, or they left New Zealand after the 10th of August 2020. Otherwise, New Zealand residents and citizens, it is free. Quick note on the Australian people coming from Australia to New Zealand. Australian residents and citizens must apply for exemption to leave Australia. Australia is a rare case in this regard. There's one of about several countries that actually require consent to leave the country as well as consent to enter. So if you are coming to New Zealand from Australia, even if you are an Australian citizen, or if you are an Australian citizen and you have a right to come to New Zealand and get a residency on arrival, you must apply for exemption from Australia. It's taking at least 2 weeks. They say to apply, you apply at least 3 months in advance. We'd say apply as early as you can to do that process, rather than booking your tickets and finding they will not let you fly. And one last comment I wanted to make was with the elections coming up in New Zealand next month. Of course, this was supposed to come up in the next week, but it's been delayed by a month due to the pandemic. We're seeing more comments from the various parties as to what they want to do with immigration if they were to get into government or remain in government. Now, we're going to steer clear of those statements until a change is made, or there's an actual announcement from someone with authority or power to make a change then and there. We will look at any sort of reliable information that comes from the current government if they're going to make a change. Typically, they will say, as Minister Fafoy's email said, this is what we're doing in the next few weeks. We know it's going to take place. Anything sort of post-election, we're not going to cover for that reason. We hear a lot of promises during election time, and with the way the New Zealand government system works, typically, since 1990, we've required a group of parties to run the country, not just one party. So promises change. So one party can say, we'll do this, another says, well, actually, no, we're not going to allow that. They join a coalition, and that no longer takes place. So we're going to sort of ignore any statements made from political parties until they actually are going to become a change in law. Until that point, they're just promises that we generally cannot hold them to. And that is it for today. It's been a long video. We actually just received a third email for the day from Immigration New Zealand about further changes to the operational manual. These were pretty minor changes. They won't actually impact this video, which is great. Have to record it again. However, with the number of emails we've received from Immigration New Zealand in the past few days and the number of announcements coming out of the Minister Fafo in the past week or two, Immigration New Zealand is definitely changing. Immigration in New Zealand is definitely changing on a daily basis. Sorry, my voice is going. I'm still recovering from my illness. Now, hei kono mai, kia pai tō koutou rā. This is Māori Language Week in New Zealand this week. So for that, we've got hei kono mai is goodbye for now. Hope I'm saying it correctly. Kia pai tō koutou rā. Have a nice day. And as always, kia kaha, stay strong, keep that mask on and those hands sanitized.